talking about not extremely sexy topic, the coordination, cooperation, governance. You may say, oh my God, that's going to be boring. Absolutely not. When I was listening yesterday and today, all panels, everybody was talking about governance, cooperation, coordination, and as the important elements. So then let's invite the panelists and let's dive into this fantastic topic. Let me start with a good friend of mine, Rémi Quirion, Chief Scientist in Quebec and President of INCSA. Please join us on the stage. Alan Weeks, I understood he's half Slovak, so that's, or 20%. He is Director General of Extreme Light Infrastructure here in Hungary. Then Lydia Borrell-Damian, Secretary General of Science Europe, based in Brussels. Kimberly Montgomery, Director for Science Diplomacy and International Affairs at the AAAS in the US. And Atish Dabholkar, Director of International Center for Theoretical Physics. My name is Vladimir Šucha, and I'm from European Commission. And it will be my pleasure to chair this wonderful, wonderful panel. We are facing, and I think this was floating somehow during the day today, yesterday, that we have difficult geopolitical situation in the world. We have a lot of challenges, deglobalization, and maybe in this challenging time, it's up to science and science diplomacy to take the important stage worldwide again, as it was functioning quite well in previous decades. And I think it was in the previous panel, this plenary panel before lunch, the US-China Planetary Health Cooperation Initiative was mentioned. I think that we have a lot of initiatives popping up, and I think that giving us the hope. Let me mention a few challenges as we discussed them also yesterday in the evening with colleagues, and that's definitely rapid technological development, which is the threat, but also a huge, huge opportunity, sustainability and long-term commitment of different actors for cooperation, political institutional barriers, trust and engagement, engagement with the public, obviously data management and sharing, and last not least, money, funding and resource allocation. So these are all challenges which we are facing in a proper governance, in a proper coordination, cooperation, and we will hear more from our panelists. So we agreed that they will have 5 to 7 minutes introductory speeches. Most of them, they have also a few slides. Then we will engage in debate within the panel, and we will obviously open up also to you for your questions and comments in the last part of the panel. So, and I hope we will be finishing on time at 1600 sharp. So let's start maybe with the first panelist, and we agree that Kimberly will kick off this panel. Kimberly, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It is a real honor to be presenting to you today and to be part of this panel with my esteemed panelist and moderator and with all of you in the audience. I want to start off by thanking the organizers for provided me this opportunity. And so today I'm going to talk about science as a mechanism to engage. I'm going to try to stay within the 5 to 7 minutes, but I do have to warn you it might be just a couple of minutes over. And I wanted to start out by showing these two pictures. And so some of you might recognize these pictures and some of you might not. On the left is the former leaders of the United States and Japan. This is a picture taken in 1961, and it's part of the time that they're talking about is they set up a U.S.-Japan science cooperation program in 1961. And on the right-hand side is the former leaders from the United States and China. This is taken in 1979, and this is when they signed the U.S.-China Science and Technology Agreement, which was the first thing that the U.S. signed after it recognized China. And so, as mentioned, I come from the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. This is our building in downtown Washington, D.C., where we have a mission, to put simply, to advance science and serve society. So for the scientists in the audience, most people might know AAAS as the publisher of the Science and Science family of journals, where you can see some of the latest covers here. And then here are 4 strategic goals that include advancing scientific excellence and achievement, fostering equity and inclusion for scientific excellence, building trust among scientists and communities, and catalyzing progress where science meets policy. In 2008, AAAS set up a Center for Science Diplomacy that is really focused on 3 things: building relationships, capacity, and community. To give you a little idea about what those things are, for capacity and community, it was setting up the intellectual foundations for science diplomacy. So AAAS, along with its partner, the Royal Society of London, published the New Frontiers in Science Diplomacy, laying out a conceptual framework for science diplomacy in 2010. The center also has an online publication, Science and Diplomacy, where we publish a lot of perspectives and articles from around the world, and so I encourage you to check that out. One of the things that we publish in there is in 2021, we started an ambassador conversation series where we interview ambassadors, mostly posted in DC, about international science and science diplomacy. The pictures you see here are recent additions, and so that's the ambassador of the Netherlands on the left and the ambassador of Brazil on the right to the United States. We also are involved in capacity development, and we have an annual course in science diplomacy with our partner, the World Academy of Sciences, that we do every year in Trieste, and this picture is from this previous summer. I'm going to move on to relationship building, and I'm going to give you an overhead, and then I'm going to go into some of the work that we've done in this space. And this is really about using science to engage with people, even if there are difficult geopolitical situations, as was already talked about in the moderator. And so on the left-hand side, you see a Cuban delegation that came to the United States in October of 2023. That is a delegation from the Cuban Academy of Sciences outside of our building. And then on the right-hand side, you see a couple of pictures from a recent delegation trip that we took to China this past May. And so I'm going to go a little bit more into talking about our work in Cuba. And so AAAS has a long history trying to connect the U.S. and Cuban scientific communities. This goes before me. So in the center picture, you actually see a delegation in Havana in 2014. Von Tarikian, who was a presenter in our last session, is actually in that picture. But the first delegation that AAAS sent to Cuba was in the late 1990s, so long before the U.S. normalized relations with Cuba. And on the right-hand side, you see our current CEO, Sudha Parikh, who has spoken at this meeting, renewing our MOU with the president of the Cuban Academy of Sciences. And this was in a trip we took to Cuba in 2022. And part of what we established in that MOU was that we would hold professional meetings. And so our first professional meeting was in March of 2023. This was on public health and the environment. And so this slide shows you some pictures from that meeting. And this is really, we brought down US government scientists, we brought down university academics, and we brought down people from the NGO community to really talk about these shared challenges. So as I often say, the water doesn't know if it's in Havana or Miami, and if Cuba has increases of dengue fever, so will the US. So how can we get the scientific communities to work on those shared problems? We held another professional meeting this last year in March. This was on aging and disaster management, and this slide shows some pictures from that. In both of these professional meetings, we had brainstorming sessions where participants would think about what other ways we could collaborate together. And the idea to bring in a third regional country was brought up in both of those. And so we were fortunate enough this past September to hold a tri-national meeting that brought together scientists and science leaders from the US, Cuba, and Mexico. We were really fortunate to have two wonderful Mexican partners, UNAM and CIVISTAD, and the group picture is in front of the CIVISTAD Southern Campus, where we talked about infectious diseases. Dengue comes a lot in this work, as you can imagine, because it's a shared problem within the region, and we also talked about aging and non-communicative diseases as well. So in the remaining time, I'm going to talk a little bit about going back to that framework that AAAS and the Royal Society published in 2010. This laid out the conceptual framework for what we are talking about when we're talking about science diplomacy, and it had three pillars: science for diplomacy, science in diplomacy, and diplomacy for science. And I always like to pause here to say that science diplomacy is not just another word for international scientific cooperation. I think it's really important to think about the motivation. So the motivation for international scientific cooperation is to advance science, and the motivation for science diplomacy is to affect relationships. And since 2010, the concept of science diplomacy has spread rapidly. There's trainings, AAAS is part of those. There are conferences. Science diplomacy as a term has been used by international scientific leaders, diplomats. It's been used in this conference so far since we've been here. And countries and regions are either adopting national scientific diplomacy strategies or thinking about the need to possibly adopt science diplomacy strategies. But another thing since 2010 is the world has changed quite a bit. So both the science and technology has changed quite a bit since 2010. The diplomatic ecosystem has changed a lot, and that's on top of a very complex changing geopolitical environment that we're operating in. And so because of that, AAAS and the Royal Society of London have decided to revise this framework in time for its 15th anniversary, which will be next year. And so throughout the last year or so, we've had a lot of roundtable events and discussions. I'm just highlighting two on this screen. So we had a high-level dialogue on the future of science diplomacy session at the INCSA meeting in Kigali. This was co-hosted by AAAS, the Royal Society, but also the European Commission and JESTA. It was a really good conversation, and I know some of the participants at this forum were in that and might recognize yourself in that photo. We also had a science and technology diplomacy session last month at the STS Forum. And along with that, we had a special issue in science diplomacy. And this was an open call for people to talk about their ideas on how science diplomacy has changed in the last 15 years. We had a really good interest in this, so we weren't able to publish everybody who wanted to participate, but we were able to publish 21 perspectives about sort of what is science diplomacy in the 21st century, including some potential unintended consequences or downsides. That's the link for the issue. It was published a couple weeks ago. I encourage you to look at that. And it was really interesting to read these pieces and work with the authors, and some of those authors are in this room. And so we're working on this revision, as I mentioned, and it will be released at the 2025 AAAS annual meeting, which will be held in Boston. So just a little plug to attend the AAAS annual meeting, which will be February 13th through 15th. And so in my remaining few minutes, I just wanted to say some challenges and opportunities for science diplomacy. I'm not going to read this whole slide to you, but I think that the first two I'm going to highlight, which are we are in a very complex geopolitical situation where S&T can even be a tension among those countries. So I think that's something to think about. But I am an optimist, and so I do fully believe that we can use science engagement to foster relationships between countries. And so I think that's also a real opportunity that we have. And so just thank you for your time, and I look forward to the discussion both here and during the coffee breaks. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you very much indeed. And we have the first highlight, and it's science diplomacy in this triple helix approach which you mentioned. And Alan, is now time for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vladimir. I appreciate that. Thank you to the World Science Forum for being invited to this beautiful place to give a talk. Thank you also to the Hungarian Academy for organizing this in collaboration with other partners. I'm going to take a specific kind of perspective from a research infrastructure. I'm coming from the extreme light infrastructure, so it's one example, but I'll try to put that into a broader perspective of what that can mean in terms of foundations for collaboration and how In the end, it helps to hopefully foster a general appreciation and pride in science. So just a few things, obviously, about ELI, just to tell you. ELI is a large-scale research infrastructure that is using lasers as the basis of its science. So just to give you an example of the kind of lasers we're talking about, what you see there is a large compression chamber from one of our more dynamic and energetic lasers. That's just one part of a laser that we have located in Prague, or in Dolní Brežiny, just outside of Prague. You can see the guys in the corner standing with large optic devices that span across a meter diagonally. So very large, very intense, very powerful lasers that have recently been enabled by technology that's come over the last 15 to 20 years. And we don't really use the lasers, we don't do science of lasers per se, but we use the lasers to do other kinds of science. Just to give you an example of the ELI facilities and where they kind of fit into the world landscape in this particular kind of growing and innovative field. What you see on the screen are blue dots of all the large-scale petawatt, terawatt class laser systems in the world, in blue. And then in red, you see the lasers that we have at the ELI facilities. And we're covering not only the very intense energies and intense power, peak powers, up to 10 petawatts in two cases of our lasers, but also large average power, which is very important for doing actual scientific research in both cases. So it's a very unique facility. It offers a broad range of sources for scientists to do fundamental science. And it's also very competitive, and this is consistent with the competitiveness that Europe has generally had over the last 20 years in this field. ELI is doing science that you may not expect. So we're doing particle acceleration. This is enabled by the high energy that we can generate with lasers today. That acceleration can be used for other things like radiation physics, X-rays, gamma rays, protons, etc. We also do high energy density studies, so putting plasmas with a lot of concentration of energy in one place, we can simulate conditions in the universe. We can also simulate fusion experiments inside and even create fusion experiments inside the lab, which are very important for some of the developments around energy. And if any of you followed developments at the National Ignition Facility in the US, you may know that lasers are one of the possible pathways to fusion energy in the future. But also we're studying very, very ultra-fast dynamics in the femtosecond to attosecond range of time domain, which means billions of a billionth of a second. So there's more attoseconds in a second than there are seconds in the history of the universe, just to give you an idea of the time scales. ELI is an open facility. It's open to users from around the world. We actually have 3 facilities, and you can access those facilities through making a proposal as a scientist, or you can also pay for certain access. And in certain cases, we are also making access available to address some of the world's challenges, like energy, like medicine. You saw many cases of this or examples of this around the world during the COVID breakout, where a lot of research infrastructures really focused their resources on how they could focus on and study the problems around COVID and fighting it. I should just say that in all cases, the data that scientists acquire when they come to use ELI for free have to be open data, and they have to be published. If you need your data to be somehow proprietary, then you actually have to pay for access to the facilities. So ELI is located in 3 places in Europe. It was built with European structural funds, and it was built starting in 2012, and we came online about 2 years ago. There's a facility here in southeast Hungary, in the city of Szeged. There's also a facility, as I mentioned before, just outside of Prague. It's ELI Beamlines, and another facility in Romania, ELI Nuclear Photonics. And each of these 3 facilities by itself would more or less be a world-class leading facility, but we have the 3 facilities cooperating under one governance. So it means we're actually operating it as a single user facility, even though it's on multiple sites. We have 7 countries that have actually enabled ELI to be going, especially the 3 host countries. I already mentioned the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Romania, also Lithuania, also Italy was an important founding member, Germany and Bulgaria, and of course, we're looking for additional partners, and we partner with countries from all around the world. We have over 600 staff working at ELI from 37 different countries, so quite international facilities in terms of the staffing. The facilities are large, so altogether we're talking about around 90,000 square meters in the 3 facilities. That's 900 square feet for those of you who don't work in the metric system. Of that, 20,000 square meters, 200,000 square feet, are in clean rooms. So that's a pretty important thing, because clean rooms are important, and I'm going to come back to that at the end. 20,000 square meters, so a single speck of dust can cause millions of euro of damage to some of these systems. So it's very important that we keep the spaces clean, and they're housing really some of the leading scientific equipment that we have in this community. We're also seeing science at Eli as a very human endeavor. So one of our important missions is to train people. It's no accident that Eli facilities are located in Central Europe. Part of the reason for that, and one of the main missions of Eli, is to increase the capacity of scientists in this area, but also to attract students, young people, to stay in this area and to keep people in this part of the world, and to keep the talent here and to build human capacity. So we think this is an important feature of research infrastructures. They don't just offer a place to do research, but they offer a place for people to come together and to collaborate. I just touch off for a moment a bit more on the European landscape around infrastructures. So Europe is somehow coordinated in terms of research infrastructures through a body called the European Strategy Forum on Research Infrastructures, or ESFRI, as we know it very much in Europe. Eli has been on the ESFRI roadmap since 2006. There have been a number of roadmaps published since then. Additional infrastructures have been added to the roadmap. So ESFRI brings together members from EU member states and associated countries, and they coordinate a kind of general strategy around research infrastructures in Europe. It's been very important. There are 63 research infrastructures listed on the ESFRI roadmaps. Of those 63, I should just say about 16 of them are what we call single-sided facilities. So it means really a facility where you come to do the research. The rest are what we call distributed research infrastructures. So really combinations of national infrastructures, databases that people can also work together on across borders in order to combine resources together. So this is kind of a long-term development reference body for the EU. There is also another forum where I'm the vice chair, actually, called the ERIC Forum, where organizations like Eli, which is a European Research Infrastructure Consortium, it's not a treaty-based organization, but it's an organization established under the EU treaty as part of an EU regulation. So it acts as an international organization within Europe. We have 28 ERICs around Europe. The ERIC Forum is a network of those ERICs. It provides a platform for addressing common challenges related to governance, funding, obviously, operations. We exchange best practices, and also help to promote the interest of ERICs and new ERICs coming through the pipeline. We work closely with the European Commission as well as all the member states of Europe. There are 28 ERICs, and again, the majority of these ERICs are actually distributed research infrastructures, which require an enormous amount of coordination across different bodies. So finally, the last thing I wanted to say as we get into this is that's all great. And I attend a lot of conferences around policy and science. And as I was reading the draft of the resolution that's being prepared, I think obviously this conference comes at an interesting time because oftentimes we are confronted with how are people valorizing science in society, and how are we competing with things that are opposite from facts and rational thinking that scientists are trained to think in. So one thing I would leave you with as a final note relative to the importance of research infrastructures. I think other than just the tool, one of the things that's inspired me the most about working in this field is the people that I meet. One of the most inspiring people that I've met happens to be Katalin Karikó, who won the Nobel Prize last year, and she won it for her work on the mRNA vaccine. And one of the things that impressed me the most about her is that Katalin actually never had the benefit of a large-scale research infrastructure. She was a Hungarian immigrant who worked in the States. She almost never got funding throughout her career. She had to change jobs multiple times, and she had an idea that no one really believed in for a very, very long time. So it was a pretty remarkable development when the COVID vaccine was rolled out during COVID, but it wasn't something that happened just in a year. The development happened over a 30-year period. And there were only a few people, including Katalin, who really believed in the idea of the mRNA vaccine. The reason I'm telling you this is because when she won the Nobel Prize and she returned back to Szeged, where we have our facility, Eli Alps. And she gave a speech because she studied in Szeged as an undergraduate and as a master's student, and she got her PhD here in Hungary. And so when she returned to Szeged and she went to the city square, the entire town of Szeged practically showed up to listen to her and to hear her because they were proud of her. I think that's what science can do for us, and it can do for people. Science can give people pride, and it can give people hope in the future. So I think this is one of the things we have to remember when we're trying to keep the forest in perspective with all the trees. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Alan. So I think that we just heard or tick the multiple boxes of our debate. And I think that you tick the last box, which we haven't been talking about. I think that Lydia will be the next talking about the reaching out to the public through this example of Kathleen. Lydia, over to you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to address this distinguished audience and to share the panel with these fantastic experts. My colleagues have highlighted different aspects of the governance and cooperation. I would like to put the focus on international cooperation, as this is a highly international community present here, and especially on a keyword that we are hearing often these days and increasingly hearing is reciprocity in multilateral research collaboration. So I will present several key conclusions of very recent dialogues that on behalf of Science Europe and with other partners around the globe, we have held in the last year or so. Let me start with the conclusions of an event that we hosted together with the National Research Council of Norway in the framework of the Science Summit of the United Nations Assembly in New York in September this year, which was, we brought together experts from all over the world, experts in international cooperation, to bring the voices. These were really, truly international panels that we organized there. And they responded to several questions, especially one is why reciprocity, and why it comes so important nowadays? Well, because there is this need to approach fairly how to solve the challenges raised in the Sustainable Development Goals, and because we need to build a more peaceful world, a more fair world, a more human world than the one that we are witnessing today. And this can only be achieved through reciprocity in multiple levels, but of course in science, which we are talking here, is particularly important and relevant. However, when we zoom into the existing collaborations, and I will talk a little bit more about that, we find that there is a need for a radical change, a radical way where the international research collaborations are approached. And this is because we want them not only to be fair to all partners involved, but also because we want to deliver academic freedom, and because we want to deliver research excellence, and because we want to deliver on research integrity. So, what are the elements of this reciprocity? When we say reciprocity, and again, this is not my thinking or even my organization's thinking, this is the thinking of those that were participating in these international debates. So, first of all, was about putting people and their backgrounds at the center of negotiations to establish programs and projects in international cooperation. Taking into account that a relationship is as good as trust is in the relationship. And as trust takes some time to build, international research collaborations can only develop at the speed of trust. For that as well, we need researchers to be ready, to have a change in mindset, because if we keep continuing on the current mindset, very driven towards publications, urgency, fast results, this time to develop the trust and to develop the reciprocity is not there. In addition, when we talk about, I don't like the terms, but let me use them for practical purposes, global North and global South relationships, we find often that indigenous knowledge is neglected. And there is a plea to build knowledge, also including those indigenous knowledges. And look, note the S, because that was done by an Indian researcher who said there is not just indigenous knowledge, it's indigenous knowledges. So this S is really meaningful. And we know that there are many, many impediments to this kind of ideal vision of international cooperation. But we believe it's our responsibility in the scientific community to provide the conditions enabling for that to happen. And one of them, curiously enough, emerges very often, is the visa process, scholar visa process, which is extremely difficult to get in many places. Now, I will zoom into some characteristics of cooperation between European research organizations and African research organizations, and between European and Latin American research collaborations, because these are the ones that we have studied the most up until then. So I would like here to be a little bit the spokesperson of those people that came from Africa, from Latin America, or when we were there, and that brought in their views, and they say, sorry, great collaboration, we want to collaborate, but overall, the current trend is not what we need. So what do we need? What do they need, sorry? A word that often comes into the dialogue is decolonization. They feel that the global North debarks on their countries with some unintended, but in practice, extractive practices, not really contributing to the building capacity of their own lands. And so this decolonization is very heavy in their minds. And here in the photo, you have Yaya Sangare, who is the director of the Ivory Coast Research Agency, one of the most vocal people in Africa these days. Another element is to truly define joint research agendas from day zero, and not to come with a proposal already made the way, let's say, Europe thinks or the global North thinks. Again, the scholar visas are a big problem, but also what they think, and that's the reflection, that is a big impediment to develop the research capacity in their own countries. So if we really want to help, we need to put our mindset in developing the capacity, so that we can close the gap between the, whatever qualification you want to say, global North, global South, inequality, etc. But closing the gap for research and innovation is clear a need. In this sense, we'll finish. In this sense, the Global Research Council is an organization composed of the national research councils from around the globe, developed some principles for sustainable research. I will not go into it for that, but my point to show them here was to demonstrate that they reflect very much the ideas that I just developed. So there is a great deal of consensus over there of what works, what doesn't. There is a need for a space to build these reciprocal relationships. There is a need for research funding organizations to provide those opportunities, and for research performing organizations also to raise up their voice to indicate what is really needed. We believe there is a role for G7 and G20 to show ways of doing it, to lead by example, make open science and the dialogue with research security also a central pole of discussion and clarification, and showcase to politicians the tangible outcomes of research so they can understand that investing in research is of benefit for all. So that's my comment. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lydia. So you brought to our attention the keyword reciprocity, decolonization, and also you are pleading for more trust in building this sustainable relationship. Definitely trust is a very scarce commodity, and we can discuss this issue because that's the basis of cooperation. Remy, it's time for you now, please.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Je voudrais remercier les membres du comité organisateur pour l'invitation de participer à cette session. That's all for French for the moment. So the topic of this session, extremely important, and colleagues have mentioned that already, considering the geopolitical context. Considering also the impact of new technology like AI in our society. But I will be here a bit provocative by saying that coordination, collaboration, and governance is not sufficient any longer. We have to go beyond that. We have to be more ambitious. We have to basically develop genuine partnership, maybe a bit more French. Partenaire, en français, c'est très différent de collaborateur. A partner, kind of a couple. So it's very different from a collaborator. And we have to do that. We have to move into partnership. And genuine partnership take time, and you must be equal. Was mentioned Global North, Global South. Also, working and using bottom-up initiative, not just top-down initiative that we know very well and that we are too comfortable with. So this may mean, for me, for you, for most global organizations, that we will have to give up, or at least to share some power. We'll have to listen for real, and we'll have to be genuine with our partner from anywhere in the world. That also will be associated to open governance. Of course, all that is much easier than done, easier said than done. One of my bias, if we think of the SDGs, it's number 4. They are all very important, but number 4 is key. Education. Education for all, everywhere in the world. And by increasing education, science literacy also is part of that, and that would be a way, an indirect way maybe, to fight against fake news, disinformation, and misinformation. So it means also that we have to empower people, I will say in quote, ordinary people, that we have to empower citizens everywhere in the world, and that we as global organization have to facilitate partnership and have to improve trust in science. That's a big job, as we have seen over the past few days here. Trust in science, trust in fact and data, open science for that matter is certainly critical. How to achieve these goals? As I said, much easier to say me on the podium than to do. But I want to give you 2 examples based on my day job. For those of you who know me, usually I like action, not writing so many reports, but doing things. The first one, INGSA, the International Network for Governmental Science Advice, that I chair. We have a head of chapter in the room here. INGSA, about 6,000 members in the world, over 130 different countries. It's an affiliate of ISC, and it's free membership. So if you're not a member, please join. The niche of INGSA building capacity in science advice all over the world. Our main approach, interactive workshop. So you play role-playing in these type of workshop, and it work extremely well. But here again, partnership is absolutely essential. So we are organized by chapter. First chapter to be established, Africa. Then Latin America and the Caribbean, then Asia. Now we're hoping to build a chapter in Europe and one in North America. And of course, these chapters are on the ground. They work with experts in their local community. They work with their citizens. And that's the beauty of INCSA. So we take into consideration communities, language, and culture. And it was mentioned during the meeting here that culture is too often forgotten when we talk about science and building capacity in science. The chapter in Europe, the new one that we are building, will be on that, culture and language, in the delivery of effective science advice. The one in North America will be on cities, on citizens in municipalities, because there you need the type of advice that's very practical. We also have developed training hub, one in Rwanda, and we're discussing for another one in Malaysia. So to create some kind of knowledge exchange network on science advice that will be led by these chapters. So really from global to local. And here again, genuine partnership is absolutely essential. And we start to have a lot of interest by various organizations, even the UN, because we are very local. We can go into community with the various chapters of INCSA. If I come to Quebec now, my other day job as Quebec Chief Scientist, we are a funder of many of the initiatives of INCSA. We are discussing now about creating in Quebec 7 to 8 chair in science diplomacy, and of course they will have direct link at the international level. We have started training program for students, grad students from Rwanda, to come to university in Quebec in the field of AI and in the field of quantum computing. And then one of the agreements with Rwanda is that these students go back to their home country. And it's really bridges between Rwanda and Quebec for many years. In addition to that, we have a program of science in exile, helping trainees and scientists from Palestine, from Afghanistan, from Iran, from Ukraine, and I think it's very, very important to do more on that level for all organizations in the world. We also have various programs of scientists in residence for trainees that could go to work in office, Quebec office abroad, Quebec government, but also in cities, local community in cities, and they do a postdoc kind of program instead of going into their chemistry lab. And finally, the last thing, engagement. It's a program we have, and others have that in various parts of the world, but this is citizen science, participatory science, extremely critical. My salary is paid by Quebec and Canadian taxpayers. So we have to give back to them and include them in scientific projects, scientific program. Of course, it's time consuming, but at the end of the day, if it works a little bit, they become very strong advocate for us, much more than me when I talk to my government. So partnership key, and I will repeat it again in France, partenaire, and I think we should have that word in every type of language and really look at it carefully, analyze it very, very carefully, and mean it on the ground to have eventually, at a meeting like this one, participation from citizens. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Indeed, Rémi, révolutionnaire, partenariat. So this is the highlight I'm taking. So changing from cooperation to partnership, which requires the trust Lydia mentioned. So I think that we are getting together in our thinking. And so let's hear from Matish as the last introductory speech, and then we engage in this debate. And I'm sure that we will be ending by midnight because it's there's so many good ideas. So then we probably will continue over dinner as well. Atish, over to you.
Thank you. So thank you for inviting me here to speak in this wonderful session. Some of the questions that I would like to address have already been raised. Some of the provocative questions, that how do we really talk about international partnerships rather than just cooperation? And I think it's a question that should be asked. That I have been now to 3 World Science Forums, and one can ask, how exactly do we wish to deliver? I mean, so we all agree on the wonderful principles which were outlined. We want inclusivity, we want international partnerships, we want to reach out to make science globally available. But so I think we all agree upon what needs to be done. And the question is, how should we do it? And of course, we heard some very interesting, there are already networks of the kind that ELI, for example, is an example. And I would like to tell you about one such a really special, unique organization, which I'm privileged to lead, which is the ICTP, the International Center for Theoretical Physics. So I just want to tell you what is the ICTP model, how it has been actually delivering on both international partnerships, science advocacy, in a manner that is unique to it, to the mission of this institution, and which I think is very powerful, as you will see. So ICTP was founded, it's at this very beautiful location in Trieste. It was founded by the great Abdus Salam, a Nobel laureate in theoretical physics from Pakistan. And his idea was to create an international hub for advanced science so that science really becomes globally available. Last week, we celebrated our 60th anniversary, and I'm very happy that it was a big success, and there was renewed enthusiasm for ICTP for the next 60 years. And the way I see it, our mission rests on 3 pillars: excellence at the frontiers of science, but global inclusion for scientific resources, and international cooperation and partnerships through science. And global inclusion really means really helping to overcome the barriers not only of gender and ethnicity, as one normally talks about, but also geography, which often is a much bigger barrier, and economics. And this is what ICTP has been doing successfully for the last 60 years. And this is our report card, just to tell you. Currently, we have about 400 scientists working at the center from 100 countries, and you can see this is like a rainbow of scientists, including students and postdocs. Since 1970, over 200,000 scientists from all over the world have visited our campus from basically every country in the world. 65% are from developing countries, and they're fully funded by ICTP, and about 1/3 of them are women. And every year, we have 6,000 scientists coming to ICTP for 60 very high-level conferences. And ICTP is not a service provider or a conference center, but it's really a place where the top scientists in the world, a brilliant student from Ethiopia has an opportunity to talk to a Nobel laureate. And this is the kind of environment that we want to create. Talking of excellence, several breakthroughs have come from the research done by my colleagues at ICTP, which has contributed to a number of Nobel Prizes also. So this is a unique international research organization dedicated to making advanced science globally available. And once again, you can see this wonderful panorama of international science. And it's really, I was asking myself, what makes ICTP special? And there are 2 aspects. One is that it's a UN organization. So it's a UN organization because we are governed by a tripartite agreement between the Atomic Energy Agency, UNESCO, and the Italian government. At the same time, we are a very high-level research organization. So we are not a policy organization like much of the organizations within the UN system, but we are a research organization within the UN system. So it's kind of, we are the implementing arm of the strategies that are outlined. And you need implementation. This is what we have been discussing. That we can talk about inclusion and we talk about international cooperation, but how do we implement it? And here is an example of how we implement it. And this fundamental mission of ICTP now needs newer articulation and newer modes of implementation, which is what I want to tell you about. So the question is that it's clear to this session that ICTP remains even more relevant today. There is a greater need to emphasize the trust in science, greater need to ensure this is a new concept of open science. So we need equitable opportunities in this ongoing technological and scientific revolution, including AI, machine learning. So this becomes a goal, an important goal for ICTP, and ICTP is really standing up to this challenge, and a greater need to ensure essential global participation to address global challenges like climate change. So this is also a very important issue I will mention briefly in the next slide. So what is the future of computing and quantum science? It's clear that computation has emerged as the third pillar of science. Before we had theory and experiment at the time of Ibn al-Haytham or Bacon. But computation is now going to be, I'm myself a pencil and paper theoretical physicist, but I see that for the next generation, computation is very fundamentally important. And if these tools remain locked, GPU programming, modern algorithms in some few companies in Bay Area, it's not going to be good for the world. So I really look upon this as an obligation as the director of this institute to find the means, and we don't have the means yet, but we are looking for it, to make these critical resources for science globally available. And how do we plan to do it? We plan to do it through partnerships. So with this idea, our scientific council approved this International Consortium for Scientific Computing because open science means open access to computational resources, open codes. Like if you have a climate model, people should be able to open it up and see what it is inside. And open weights, because if you have some neural network learning, how is it evaluating its situation? And the idea is to have, for scientific computing, an international consortium, not a local institute. When it will be central node will be in Trieste, but we have really global partnerships. And I'm very happy to report that we have signed quite substantial agreements with the Brazil Ministry of Science, with South Africa, so governments like that. Vietnam, I'll be going there in two weeks. IBM, corporations like IBM will give us substantial funding for workshops in AI and quantum computing. Foundations like Simons Foundation, Arab Fund, Kuwait Foundation. So we are really building partnerships, exactly as what was described, to create a consortium to make these global resources available. So I hope that there are other partners sitting in the audience. Similar issue arises for climate and energy. And ICTP really has the mandate and the convening power as the UN organization to do something about it. To give an example, we have held monsoon workshops many times, and it's the only place, you talked about the visa regimes. Being a UN organization, we can actually override these visa regimes. And sometimes scientists from China, India, and Pakistan, I come from India, can talk to each other only at ICTP, coming to Trieste, because they come to a neutral territory, which is open to everybody. In fact, a wonderful example was that the first plasma physics conference at the height of the Cold War took place at ICTP in 1964, 60 years ago, where some of the top plasma physicists from Soviet Union could, for the first time, talk to their Western counterparts. So, yeah, I'll be done in a minute. So ICTP must help create strong scientific communities in the global south, because climate is a fundamentally global issue. Having some fancy model in Bologna is not going to help if a climate scientist in Ghana cannot really use it, open it, to make predictions for the rainfall, which is what the Ghanaian economy depends on. With that, our idea is to launch this consortium for future Earth, very similar to the Consortium for Scientific Computing, again, through global partnerships. So I think I will stop here. These are just a couple of the ideas where ICTP envisions for the future. And I would say that some of the questions which have been raised, ICTP could be considered as a good model for actually implementing some of the ideas that we want to see implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Atish. So then you actually solved the issue and the call of Remy. So I think this is a very good, good orchestration of the panel in this respect. I think that we heard a lot of important key elements, keywords in your introductory words. And now let's dive a little bit deeper into it. So I think that we have two good examples of infrastructures in a way, or international organizations, how to build this partnership. Because I think this is not a cooperation in ELI, it's not a cooperation in ICTP, it is a true partnership. And it's not just the partnership of few institutions, it's this is European going global, and your is a global. And on the top of that, we have CERN, we have EASA, we have other organizations already. Is there anything we can learn from this to upgrade somehow on the higher international level, that we can boost those partnerships Remy was rightly asked for? Would you be able, would you like to maybe develop a little bit more the abstraction going out of your, I would say, daily work and hundreds of scientists you are taking care of, and to try to think about this superstructure, this advice which should be somehow extracted from this. I see, Atish, you're ready to solve this issue.
Okay. No, I think I would say that I would actually take your question in the opposite direction, in that what the experience of ICTP shows is that it's far more effective to do bottom-up building of partnerships rather than determining a policy document in the UN headquarters and expect that that will get implemented. I think, to give you an example, everybody probably here knows about the Sesame project. It's a wonderful, it's almost like a news from the alternative universe. It's, if you think about it, it's a cooperative project for a synchrotron facility in Jordan, supported by Israel, Palestine, Iran, all the countries. And some of these ideas started in a cafe in ICTP, because that's where you meet informally. The scientists speak the same language, the universal language of physics. ICTP held one of the first conferences in Dahad to bring together scientists from this region. And it looked like a pipe dream, honestly. 20 years ago, nobody believed that this would actually happen. It has difficulties, but it has been achieved. And it could not have been achieved without this informal community of scientists which were already connected to each other through physics and through science. If you had taken this top-down approach and some prime minister of two countries deciding that we want to collaborate, I don't think it would have functioned that well. It would not have worked, in fact.
Okay, so that means that we should, but it cannot happen without these prime ministers, so we should not somehow evacuate them from this. But this needs to be, it needs to go hand in hand, and it's very important that we are creating, actually coming back to what Lydia was mentioning, the trust, and Kim, you mentioned the science diplomacy. This is creating the space for this kind of peer-to-peer contacts and ideas, and we need to have open channels between this bottom and very top. Because if we have layers, too many layers of bureaucracies, which will kill the good ideas, and you may have a visionary prime minister or minister, but he or she is not getting the idea. So I think that that's maybe one message for World Science Forum to advocate for, if we want to have more of this kind of cooperations, actually to achieve more trust, more cooperation, more governance. Yeah, Remy?
For me, I agree, and that add a couple of things and well, a couple of examples. The Genome Project was an amazing enterprise as well. And yes, the politician was there, but they're kind of out of the way. So it was mostly led by scientists. Space, exploration, man on the moon, also, they of course started with the politician, president, but then of course the scientists became very, very much involved. A piece that in my mind is kind of missing, it's fabulous, the infrastructure and all that, but it's a bit more what I was mentioning toward the end, to involve early in these type of programs, to involve ordinary citizens. It's challenging, take more time, you have to explain, but they can become strong advocates. And yes, trust in science has decreased, but compared to many other disciplines, it's still very high. So I think we need to use that properly, and I'm quite optimistic that we can do it.
Okay, so Alan, trying to elaborate on this substructure, and then Kim and Lydia.
Is that working?
Yeah, work.
Okay, great. I agree with Remy, and I think in the sense that the citizen science is critical, because as I said in my talk, we need simply people to have pride. They believe in things that they can be proud of, the same way you're proud of a football team. You're proud of the science that you create in your community or the people that you know. People need to feel they're a part of that. The people who work in science, remember, are not always scientists. I mentioned we have 20,000 square meters of clean room. You know, every time I talk to the people who clean those rooms, they're not scientists, but they know they're contributing to science. And I think in many ways we could bring that into a broader citizen context. Why is that important? Because I'll be very banal now. I run a facility. I have 600 people working for me. At the end of the day, somehow there's going to have to be a funding mechanism to make the science work. And if we want to see the collaboration work across borders, we need to see funding mechanisms that work across borders. In Europe, we've seen over the last 20 years the framework programs, which have been extremely effective. They're one of the largest, most successful funding programs in the world. And one of the key things that has been successful about that is it's brought scientists from different countries together to collaborate. That's an absolute element of the framework programs. So I think those kind of things, what can we do? We see some aspect of that when we have associated countries with framework programs, but you see international organizations that are very successful because they have funding mechanisms to be able to make that happen. And I hate to be so banal about it, but that's important. Maybe just the last thing I would comment is, generally speaking, I think in all aspects or all areas of science, we're missing people. We need more people. In my view, today in the world, it's probably one of the best times in history to be a physicist. There are so many opportunities, at least in that area or that field, to work anywhere in the world, no matter where you come from, if you're smart. But maybe people aren't aware about that. Maybe they don't know about that. And it's not a question if you're a man or a woman, it's just, are you a human being? We need people working in this field. And if we're going to continue to kind of grow at the pace we need, then we simply need more human resources in this field.
Okay, Kim?
I think there's a real opportunity to build better relationships between the scientific and foreign affairs community. And I think it's one of the reasons that we have this great program that actually is held in Trieste, so it's wonderful to see those photos, which is an annual course on science diplomacy. And a couple years back, we changed that to a participant pair model where pairs of comprised of a policymaker, a decision maker, and a young scientist from the same country would apply and take the course together. And so it's one little way, but I think there's a lot of other ways to think about how we need to build stronger connections between the scientific and foreign affairs communities.
Okay, wonderful. Lydia?
Yes, thank you. I would like to contribute to this question by highlighting that, yes, of course, the trust comes from researcher to researcher when there is a community there that trust each other because they are partners in excellence. But we need a strong signal from the policy and from the politics. And this interaction between policy, politics, and researchers that has to be better aligned, like sort of a virtuous circle, because the funding agencies have the capacity to set the norms for the funding instruments. And those norms are based on values. And I know that other speakers in this World Science Forum have been speaking very loudly about values, and I want to contribute to that as well, because values underpin behaviors. If we want researchers to be driven by the excellence or the reputation of the journal where they publish, that informs behavior. If we want researchers to concentrate on the quality of they are doing, no matter how many papers or the reputation of the journal, then that is influencing behavior. So I think that we need to reinforce the dialogue of the value system of the research community that stands for academic freedom, that stands for integrity, that needs to reach the policymaking community and the politician community. Then we create trust, because researchers can meet within the good conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree. There is a big mistrust between research and politics and policy making. But in my experience, there is more weight on research to reach out to policy and politicians than vice versa, because they can survive without. I think, and I think that we need to take this initiative. Maybe let's talk a little bit about this because I don't think that we will move forward if we stay only in the bubble of research community. We definitely need to reach out to citizens. And maybe through the citizens, we can reach out to politicians. I think that's not, we can reach out to directly, and I can share my own experience. We have in my old times in my previous job in the European Commission, we started with some initiative, the Science Meets Parliament. And so then we pair the scientists with members of European Parliament, and it went out to national parliament as well. So then we added the plural, Science Meets Parliament, and this is actually the game-changing exercise. If the politicians spend one day in the lab of scientists and they intensively talk and they have a pairing, on both sides, so that the scientist better understands the constraints of politics and vice versa. So I think that it really does not cost a lot, very little, and it can bring. But is there anything else which you can share? Kim?
I know of that program, and that program is really good. I can't let that go without saying that AAAS has had a Science Technology Policy Fellowship. It celebrated its 50th anniversary last year. I'm an alum of that program, and it's an immersive fellowship program that puts scientists in either, well, now all branches, but the congressional, executive, and judicial branch of the US government, and they spend a year or two in those places. And it really has changed, because I think, especially if you come with the humility of saying, even if you're a top scientist, you might not actually know that much about the policy-making process, and the people involved in that policy-making process are experts and have a lot that you could learn from them. But it really is this personal relationship. So I think that's been really successful.
Absolutely. I think that AAAS should be praised for this. It's a great invention, 50 years, so it's quite long, and it's achievement. And I would really recommend, but I was unsuccessful at the European Commission. I wanted to have one strand of Marie Curie to place the scientists into governments, and I failed. I'm sorry to say this. Remy?
Trying that, I mentioned that a little bit, trying that with young postdoc that goes to work in ministry in the Quebec government. But what I want to say is more an example, a program that we started a few years back. We call it Audacious would say maybe crazy idea, and was telling scientists and citizens, send us your kind of weird idea. You don't have much data. You don't know exactly where it's going. And because now it's so difficult to get a grant that you don't take risk. You write every little detail. And my analogy, mostly for probably the American or the Japanese in the room, was baseball. We don't want necessarily to go to first base. We want an home run. We know after that will be 3 strikes, and that's fine. That should be research. One example. A woman, a farmer, making goose liver, fatty goose liver. She did not like to force-fed. She was feeling bad about that. She decided to call people, endocrinologists, animal physiologists, etc., animal behavior expert. She wrote a grant with these guys, and then they got a new ways to force-fed these animals. She talked with my minister. She was much more effective than me, saying this is important, science is important. She just did not talk about a little bit about our project, but more science in general. And I think we need to multiply this type of project and program by 100-fold.
Okay, excellent. Alan, I know that you want to say something, but before that, would you like to indicate me in the room how many of you would like to have a comment? I see 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, fine. So we have 4, not now, but just wait a second. It's for my management of time. Alan first, and then we take these 4 comments, and then we will be approaching slowly the wrapping up part of the panel.
I won't take much time. I just, speaking on Kimberly's point and your point also, Professor Suka, I think those are fantastic programs, especially when scientific trained colleagues can work in policy. They can bring the understanding of what it's like to actually be a scientist to the environment and shape policy. That's extremely valuable. Realistically speaking, at least in Europe over the last 10 to 15 years, I think what we've seen is a bit of an erosion of that in policy. I think that particularly research ministries are some of the last on the list sometimes in terms of the resources they're allocated, and many of the people who are very, very motivated people who really love science are understaffed, and they don't have the resources within the ministries to actually do some of the programs they would love to do. And so I think very often you're counting on a person or two for a whole country to implement large segments of scientific policy. So I don't have a solution to that other than to say I think it actually does help when groups, countries can come together, regions can come together, because then they can start to get a little bit of critical mass and they can share best practices and resources along those lines.
Okay, absolutely, absolutely. Atish, you wanted to say something?
I just want to add one comment related to this topic about trust in science. I think there are 2 aspects to it. One is trust with citizens, and trust among countries. About the first one, I can only make a kind of a philosophical comment that I don't have much to say, but it's evident that it is some elitism of science that is partly responsible for this, that I think unless the science community has a sense of solidarity, I think we are not going to have trust in science. But the second one is something that ICTP has been addressing. For example, if you want to have a climate policy, it requires trust among countries. You want somebody in Ghana would not trust a climate model that is made in Bologna unless there is a big community of Ghanaian climate scientists who know how to use all these modern algorithms and do the training, open it up and adapt it to the granularities of Ghana's local conditions. And I think this is going to be extremely important in the coming years, because some of these challenges are very fundamentally global, and it's a big mistake, a very technocratic approach if you think that by having a high resolution model in Bay Area, you will solve the climate problem.
Okay, so let's go now to our audience. Gentleman here is the first row, please.
Well, I would like to add a comment about ICTP.
Okay, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
My name is Dalila Violini. I'm from the International Center of Physics in Colombia. ICTP has been instrumental in allowing the Andean region to participate in energy physics. And I would like just to remember shortly the history. Abdus Salam supported very strongly the creation of our center. When we created in an environment which was not favorable, a steering committee to propose high energy physics with people like Leon Lederman, like Vogt and so on, people very well known, ICTP supported this. Even we had some meeting in Trieste and in Vancouver. And then this paved the way to the project of CERN, Ellen, which was so important to do that. And today, energy physics in the Andean region is a common activity of research. So I think this is a proof that ICTP is much more than what Atish said, in the sense that also the influence the outsourcing influence has been extremely important. I'm grateful for it. Mine is a testimonial, a word of thanks, but also I think is a recognition of a mechanism.
Okay, thank you for that. It's noted, very important. Was the lady in the third row? The lady in the third row.
Oh, thank you. Phyllis Makurunje from Bangor University in Wales, UK. Speaking of international, say, collaboration, implementing partnerships, citizen science, open science, I have a question in terms of sustainability. How do we extend the sustainability model? For example, when we engage scientists from the Global South, we equip them with cutting-edge science, training, access to all these state-of-the-art research equipment facilities, and perhaps they go back to where they have originated from. And there is a fear that there's going to be dormancy, reduced contribution, reduced participation in science or in contributing to research. For example, if somebody were to get a PhD at a world-class facility or institution, they go back to the Global South, they're likely to be in a teaching role than to participate in research. How do we move this needle from having these equipped scientists, connected scientists, from receiving science to making science, to researching, to how can we make the next Nobel Prize winner to be from the Global South?
Okay, very good, very important. My lunch partner from Zakopane. So can you move to the middle of this part and then we go to the right?
Thanks so much. Agata Górzawska, I have a pleasure to coordinate European-funded project Verity, which actually focuses on trust in science. And I think it's fascinating that we're talking quite a lot about either trust in science or trust within the scientific community. So I wanted to make a claim and advocate for recognition that trust in science is based on collaboration, cooperation, and partnership, which was highlighted. And this collaboration and partnership depends on the collaboration of, I would say, stewards of trust, which might be traditional stewards of trust, such as research performing organizations, research funding organizations, research ethics committees, and so far, but also non-traditional stewards of trust, such as tech industry, civil society organizations, community leaders, but also social media and social media influencers. So I think what is important is to recognize that trust in science should be actually an ecosystem of trust in science with all of those different actors. And this collaboration and partnership is really important, not to be one directional, but multi-directional. And policymakers play definitely a very, very important role. So I hope that we can continue this conversation on how to make this collaboration and partnership open for everyone, and not only us researchers knocking on the door, but door is closed, how to open the door. Thank you.
Very good, very important, and that's the last contribution on my right side. Yeah, I know, but we have limited time. There are few, but so can you move, please, the microphone to the lady in the middle row on the right side? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am Snežana Krstic from Serbia, independent researcher and consultant. At the first place, I would like to thank to all speakers. Remy, merci beaucoup for very inspired communication and lectures. So this is a proof that talking about governance in science is not boring. Actually, it was very interesting. And I would like to point two things. One, we had many interesting points, but one which I would like to point is related to Idia's contribution about research integrity. Actually, if we need to have trust in science among scientists, among institutions, between scientists and society, between scientists and policymakers, research integrity is very important issue, so we should never forget this. In this context, I would like also to highlight policies which protect scientists who report science, which is practices which are not performed at the highest standards. Something like doing misconduct or something like that. I would like also this to connect to Mr. Shuha's comment that somehow it is responsibility of a scientist, or it should be our initiatives to present evidence, analysis, policies, to make initiative. So I would not like to take your show, but only to mention that I made some analysis, not some, I spent a very long time on it, which identifying some policy gaps in European policies on research integrity. So I would like to call, before it goes to citizens, I would really like to see some sort of cooperation or partnerships with the science and policy community. So if anybody is interested, I was one of initiators, please, I will be happy to talk to you. Thank you.
This kind of advertisement is allowed also at this conference. Okay, thanks a lot to everybody in the audience, and I think that I'm conscious of time. I think that we are approaching to the end, and I would like to give you the last chance to comment and to wrap up from your perspective. I see Alan is taking microphone, so let's start with you.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick, but the one comment and the question about, what can we do to in a sense, bring people back to our countries and keep the science at home in a way. This is something very close to me. This is something that Eli has built into its core mission. It's built in the European widening countries, new member countries. That's code language for developing countries. So Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, but other countries that are members are on that spectrum, so to say, but I would say they've all developed a lot. My answer is that politicians need to understand, scientists need to help politicians understand, science is about human capital and it's a strategic asset. And they have to understand that in order to develop, you have to have that strategic asset at home. You won't see industry develop in your country, and you won't see the economy grow to a value added unless you have the basis, which is value added knowledge. And I think being able to see that at a strategic level and understand it's about developing human capital is one of the most critical things that politicians will understand. And that requires sometimes special politicians. It doesn't happen all the time. It requires scientists, I think, to make the case. I think what scientists cannot do, we have to change, and it still happens sometimes, is they cannot feel entitled. We can't feel entitled that simply science is here. elitist, as Atish said. We've got to get past that. We've got to bring it to the citizens and make people understand it's about building capital for a country. I think this is super important.
Okay, thank you. The last words from Ellen. Who would like to be next? Lydia?
Yes, thank you. And I would like to respond perhaps more to the question of the lady in the third row. You're absolutely right. That is a systemic problem that some researchers from the Global South are given opportunities that they would perhaps never dream of, and then when they come back to their countries, they face a reality that is night and day. And we hear that all the time. And let me bring here an element that we perhaps not been discussing in full depth or as much as we should, is the role of institutions. Because often we talk about, we go from government and policymaker to researchers without focusing our point on institution. When we talk about capacity building, it's not just about equipping people with the right skills. It's about developing institutions in the home country. In a way, it relates to what you said. So this must not be forgotten when establishing collaborations, that individuals are not the only source of capacity building. You need performing institutions, universities, able to deal with that and to absorb those who can return from to their countries. So the role of institutions is really crucial, and sometimes we tend to put too much weight on researchers, while in fact the responsibilities should be better spread through and put more responsibility on the institutional level.
Okay, Atish?
Yeah, I would like to add to respond to your question. I think one of the ways ICTP avoids this kind of pitfall is we have a very good program called Associates Program, and what that allows you to do is sort of, it's training the trainers. It allows established, let's say a professor in a developing country to visit ICTP during a period of 6 years for several months, whenever they want, to recharge their batteries and go back inspired again. And this has been very, very successful program. And it has, I mean, just to give you one example, like Professor Tribhuvan Adhikari, he was a student at ICTP. Then he went back to Nepal in Tribhuvan University, Narayan Adhikari. And he has created a community of almost hundreds of young students and researchers around him. And he keeps coming to ICTP. So we have a long-term engagement with him for 25 years. And it's not a one-shot engagement that he came for a conference and he went back to Nepal. So I think this problem can be addressed if we approach it correctly.
Very good. Remy?
Thank you. Two points. One about trust, and I think there we should find ways to do more research on trust, because there's a cultural aspect that's very important there. Different type of trust, but also cultural aspects. So we need to understand that. It's critically important, but we need to understand that and understand how to develop trust. The other one is related to the problem that you mentioned, and I fully agree with Lydia on that, that the host institution in their own country, they must be better prepared to welcome these scientists back home. And one little note, I mentioned that we have a kind of a small program with Rwanda, and I think it's working relatively well. One young man, bright young man, got to study, complete the study in Quebec, in Canada, went back home. I think 6 months later, maybe even less, he was appointed as minister. And I said, oh no, and it happened kind of too often that they end up, in my mind, too quickly in government. Sometimes it's good, but often it's bad. We're losing that expertise that we took years to build.
Kim?
I think a number of the questions touched on sort of how to build bridges between the scientific community and other communities in the public. And so I just wanted to point out that AAAS has really sort of indicated what are some key societal influencers in the public that we should build stronger relationships with. And so we identified 4 that work in a US context. So one is policymakers and diplomats, which we've certainly talked about here, how there's a need to build stronger bridges between the scientific community and the policy community and the diplomatic community. The second is judges. So certainly there's a need to build stronger connections there, and more scientific decisions, especially in the US, are going to be decided by the judiciary system. The third is press. So unfortunately in the US, but many other countries, we're seeing the decreasing science journalism. That we need more, and we need to pass on that expertise to journalists. We have a number of programs that are really focused on connecting local scientists with local journalists, so that if, I'm from St. Louis, and if there's an article in the local paper, they should quote a local scientist and really build those community ties. And the fourth one for us is faith leaders, and having stronger connections between the scientific community and the faith leaders. So I think there's a lot of work we can do by ourselves, but even more together to build stronger bridges between the scientific and all of these important communities and the broader community.
Many thanks, and let me wrap this up in 20 seconds. I think that finally my panel made this, what seemingly was a boring topic, a very exciting and sexy topic, and we see that this is the core business of success of science in a society and science for the society. And there is one big precondition for that, and I think that we all agree, we agreed on this, it's trust. And then building on the trust, we can have a true partnership, as Remy was advocating for. And I will be borrowing your term, the trust ecosystem, because it's not only trust with citizens, it's also, but of course it is trust with citizens, but it's also trust between scientists, but also trust between countries, and trust between the layer of science and the layer of policy making and political elite, which is extremely important. And that's one suggestion for, I hope Gergely is here somewhere, for World Science Forum, to maybe organize and even trigger some comprehensive study on different studies on trust, because there is a lot of research on trust, but let's try to do something, some comprehensive study. What are those elements we can build up? Because these cafe meetings, which are important, as you mentioned, are really building the big things in the future, but we need to get from these cafes, we need to get to this political level, and also we can collect, and that would be another maybe task for World Science Forum, to collect all these initiatives like AAA's initiative, the initiative of the Commission and European Parliament, Science in its Parliament, and many others, because I can imagine that there are plenty of those initiatives as a toolbox how to build this trust between these different layers, and then we can have a perfect, now there is a third one. Maybe we should be looking at all these infrastructures which are already in place, and we mentioned some of them, and you represent 2 of them, and to draw the lesson from those partnerships there, how this can be somehow generalized and used in a policy for the institutions, Lydia, you mentioned, which are playing absolutely important role. So that would be probably the conclusion with the 3 tasks for World Science Forum in the future. And I would like to ask you to give the round of applause to wonderful panelists.